You know, some of my fondest memories back in the early 2000s was going through OnRPG's website or MMORPG.com and just sifting through the list of different free MMOs to try. Doing that is what led me to discover some awesome titles like MapleStory, RuneScape, Letale, etc. There is another game that I did find through this method back in the day though. That game is called Eternal Lands. Eternal Lands, abbreviated as EL, is a free skill-based MMORPG created by developer Radu Pravantu in 2002. The website details the developers currently still working on the game, with Entropy and Roja being credited as the original creators. Eternal Lands can best be described as one of the first indie-developed MMORPGs. Nowadays, we see tons of projects on websites like Kickstarter or GoFundMe for indie MMOs, with many turning out to be scams.
Why is it that MMOs specifically suck on Kickstarter? Why does it seem like it's just so hard for people to just be honest? But you give the developer all that money at the beginning, they have zero incentive to follow through with anything. Man, Kickstarter is just a really good place to sell ideas.
Eternal Lands, at its heart, is a game released by people who simply wanted to create a game and see their dream be shared by players who gave their game a chance. Unfortunately, Eternal Lands never quite took off the way it should have. Looking at numbers that Radu themselves shared in 2005, peak player base hung around 500 concurrent players, and for a time they were growing, with the highest amount of players online ever at once being 988 in 2008. Nowadays, the total player base online hovers around 150 players, with most of them being dedicated veterans of the game, or in some cases, players playing multiple accounts. Because of the low budget and small advertising the game had, Eternal Lands has stayed relatively unknown to the mass population of MMORPG gamers. The game is now almost 2 decades old at this point and seems to be hanging on by a thread. The game's social media has been relatively abandoned, and for the most part, it's the community that keeps it alive at this point. Does Eternal Lands deserve a spot in the light after all these years, or should it be destined to wallow in the deep corners of the internet and slowly fade away? Ultimately, the question of this video will be, is Eternal Lands dead or alive? Eternal Lands was created by the small team Radu Pravantu in 2002, with a playable pre-alpha version being released on February 13th, 2003. Over the next few years, the small company would grow to add a few extra developers that joined from the community. The game was an open source project, meaning that players could build environments or certain pieces of content within a test server and submit their build to a team of moderators that would then review the build and either accept or deny the build to connect to their main server. After the release of the alpha client, the community would slowly grow to a dedicated yet small fan base. Over the years, the company would attempt different strategies to try and get the word out about their game. Website advertising and word of mouth from the player base were two of the main strategies that main devs would attempt to bring more players to the game. In 2005, an interview with the main developer was posted onto GameDev.net, which details a lot of the game's struggles and goals that they were currently facing. Things like fearing that no one would play their game or find their game was one of the standout statements to me, and for the most part, unfortunately, I think this came true. I'll leave the article link in the description for those who are interested in reading that interview, as it's a really good read, and the developer even responded to direct questions from the users, something you really don't see from modern developers. From 2005, the development team would continue to build upon the game, adding new content, improving the graphics and engine, and expanding the world's lore. Additionally, there were even 2 offshoot games that were created using Eternal Lands as the groundwork. Landes Éternels, which is essentially a French port of the game with some slight gameplay differences, and Other Life, a more challenging community-based version of the game in which player influence determines the content of the game that comes in the future. These would probably be examples of Eternal Land private servers. Ironic that such a small game has some forms of community-hosted separate servers, but since the game is open source, it's actually encouraged to do so. Think about this too. This approach to open game design from the community is also how indie developed MMO Legends of Aria also based some of their main selling points on, giving the ability for the community to create their own games. Eternal Lands continued to struggle to find a larger audience as time went on. Finding the developer blog online on blogspot.com details Radu's struggles with the game, but things seemed hopeful. They would post upcoming plans for the game, thank veteran players for sticking with the project, and overall continue to support the game. There was even apparently more advertising campaigns launched with the limited budget the developer had, like having an article in the German tech magazine CT, as well as the game client on their monthly DVD to get new players. Unfortunately, not much would come from the magazine article, since the magazine only had a small description of what Eternal Lands actually was. Once again, having EL missed the chance at grabbing a small influx of players that the community wanted. The article roughly translated to, since the groundbreaking million-player game WoW had its tremendous success, the online RPGs have left their niche of exclusive exoteric fun for internet geeks and have also bound many regular users to the fun of questing, monster hunts, and trading of artifacts. To go on a treasure hunt with players from all over the world is usually bound to expensive subscriptions. In Eternal Lands, however, you can play for free, besides the ISP connection fees, as a dwarf, elf, or human in a complex multiplayer fantasy world. As expected, there are potions, weapons, and armor of different qualities and effects, plus a lot of tasks you can work on with other players. There are additional races only playable for a fee. Also, some items for comfort and time saving can be bought for real money too. In contrast to other RPGs, Eternal Lands has no character classes. The player decides whether his character will become a fighter, mage, or healer. Another specialty of Eternal Lands is its calmness. Instead of hectic monster hunts from the start, there is a tutorial phase where the player learns how to control his character and starts hunting rabbits and beavers.
That sounds like fun.
While the developers were happy that the game was covered in a magazine, it was a shame to see that the article only gave a passing summarization of the game, which sadly was largely ignored. The next couple of spotlights the game would receive would be from YouTube channels MMO Hut and MMO Byte. MMO Hut's video was meant to be a first impressions of the game, but Eternal Lands is a very roleplay heavy type of game. The mechanics require the player to read, pay attention, and think about what they are doing, and where they need to go next.
Can you read, my son?
Well, that depends. Can you go fight?
And while many compare this game to RuneScape, it more closely resembles old school games like EverQuest or Final Fantasy XI, where the game encourages the player to truly immerse themselves within the world and try to forget that it's a game. MMO Byte would also cover the game in a recent fashion as recently as 2018, but that video also paints the game in a pretty bad light, as much of the commentary truly misses the point of what EL is trying to be. First impression videos for Eternal Lands don't really work, since playing the game for as little as 30 minutes doesn't really give the player enough time to see what the game has to offer. Funnily enough as well, both videos completely miss and skip sections of the tutorial because the player doesn't read the text properly, which if I was the developer would infuriate me, but I digress. Nowadays, Eternal Lands has sat in what seems like a hole it can't seem to get itself out of, and it doesn't help that some of the game's cash shop is fairly pay to win, which always potentially turns away new potential players, since you can outright buy certain pieces of equipment. There is even an Android version that is being developed, so it's not like the game's developers aren't trying to get the game out there to willing participants. With the game's developers trying so hard to keep the game afloat and the community helping as much as they could, what exactly went wrong here? Well, for starters, while the game did have its fair share of supporters, the game also had its fair number of cheaters, trolls, and hackers. While obviously that is common in any MMORPG, the moderators were quite lenient on rule breakers and in some cases would allow those players back into the game. The questionable cash shop items for sale, such as equipment and mounts, also became attached to the game's reputation, unfortunately. But in all honesty, while I support the developer's vision of the game wanting a more immersive hardcore experience, the game's lack of modernization and quality of life updates does hurt its marketability, as it will only ever capture that small niche audience. I remember my first time playing Eternal Lands back in middle school. I logged in, created my character, and wandered the tutorial island for what seemed like days. Eventually, I made it past the tutorial, began learning the game mechanics, and eventually became part of the community. But like most games back then, I eventually dropped EL for other games and I quickly forgot it. I was surprised to see that this game is still alive in 2020, and with the popularity of nostalgia in this day and age, I do feel that Eternal Lands could have a second chance to at least try again to gain players. I think the biggest steps the team could take to getting this out to a larger audience would be to launch this game on Steam. Steam would be most likely one of the best places to pick up potential players, especially right now as everyone is looking for new and old MMORPGs to try out. If this video ever finds the devs of Eternal Lands, I'd just like to say I appreciate all the effort you've given to the game over all these years, and I truly do hope that the game finally shines after all this time. Ladies and gents, out of all the games I've covered, I would like to try and recommend that my old school MMORPG audience try this game out. It's free to play, has a skill-based progression system, tons of roleplay potential, and some mechanics that make the game unique in comparison to other games. Yes, the game has flaws, such as its slow pacing, archaic UI, and questionable cash shop, but it does have a lot of merits to it if you can get past its rough exterior. Anyways, I want to thank all of you for watching this video. If you want to give the game a try, I linked the site down below in the description, so go check it out if you are at all interested. If you like this video, please leave a like as well as subscribe to my channel for more content like this. If you want to follow me on my social media sites like Twitter and Discord, those links are down below as well. Anyways, that is all for this video, and I will see you all next time.